It's all you.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome. I'm Stephanie Plunkett, Deputy Director and Chief Curator at the Norman Rockwell Museum. I'm speaking to you from beautiful Linwood House, which is a historic house on the museum's property in Stockbridge, Massachusetts. And we are so pleased that you were able to join us for this Rockwell Center for American Visual Studies exploration of the art of fantasy, inspired by fairy tales and mythology. The special program is created in conjunction with our current exhibition, Enchanted, A History of Fantasy Illustration, which will be on view through October 31st before traveling to the Hunter Museum of American Art in Chattanooga and the Flint Museum in Michigan. Our speaker this evening, and tomorrow morning, will explore the history and meaning of mythology and fairy tales in our lives, and the mythic characters and stories reflecting the inevitable conflict between the forces of good and evil. Tonight, art historian and exhibition catalog essayist Alice Carter will discuss the discoveries that inspired artist, poet William Blake and many of his successors to create images combining natural phenomena with supernatural elements. Today, we classify these works as fantasy art, but in their day, the pictures were the honest manifestations of a widespread conviction that the visible world was only part of the story. Her presentation is titled On the Side of Angels, Fantasy in an Age of Discovery. Please don't hesitate to put your questions in the chat or the Q&A, and my colleagues who are working hard behind the scenes, Rich Bradway and Alyssa Stubel, will bring them forward, and we will bring them to Alice. Tomorrow morning from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m., I'll explore Norman Rockwell's own flights of fantasy, and panelists Ruth Sanderson, Jane Yolen, Justin Gerard, Victo Ngai, and Ian McCaig will discuss their inspirations and their engagement with fantasy, folklore, and mythological themes. It is now my great pleasure to introduce you to Alice Carter. Alice is co-founder and professor emeritus of San Jose State University's award-winning animation and illustration program, a member of the Norman Rockwell Museum's Board of Trustees and former president. She has served as co-director of education at the Walt Disney Family Museum and as a visiting faculty member for the University of Hartford's low residency MFA in illustration. Alice's illustration clients have included Lucasfilms, Rolling Stone Magazine, the New York Times, and ABC Television, among others, and her work has been exhibited in galleries and museums throughout the country. Her many publications include The Red Rose Girls, An Uncommon Story of Art and Love, which was translated in an exhibition here at the museum, as was The Art of National Geographic. She also has written The Essential Thomas Eakins, Cecilia Beau, A Modern Painter in the Gilded Age, and The Drawings of Edwin Austin Abbey. Alice is currently at work on a book about the life and career of illustrator Franklin Booth. In addition, Alice is a member of the Hall of Fame Committee at the New York Society of Illustrators, and she is on the board of Spectrum Fantastic Art. Thank you so much for joining us, Alice. We are so thrilled to have you, and welcome everyone.
Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you for organizing this wonderful exhibit at the Norman Rockwell Museum. If you haven't seen it, do if you live anywhere in the area. As you can see, I'm not at the beautiful Linwood House. I'm in my beautiful spare bedroom in California. So hello to everyone.
It is beautiful, Alice.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for giving up part of your Friday night to talk about fantasy art. So I think we're just going to go right into it. And I'm going to start by sharing my screen. So here we go, share screen. And this should be it. And I'm going to push share. What the heck? Sick of the time limit? Okay, I don't want to do that. Help me, Rich. Oops.
Probably unshare and then try sharing your screen to the PowerPoint.
Okay, stop share and we'll.
Actually, start your PowerPoint first.
Okay, let me do that. Well, we rehearsed this, everyone. Okay, here we go.
Now share your screen and select the PowerPoint screen.
Okay, let me escape and get back to you and share my screen. And there we have it. Okay, I hope this works. And
there we go.
Slideshow, play from start. There we go. Hooray. All right. So everybody see it? We're okay, Rich?
We are great. Thank you.
Okay, so let's get started. We're going to start, like Stephanie said, with the British artist, poet, and mystic William Blake. And I'm going to be giving you the dates. We're going to cover about 100 years here. So you're going to probably want to be oriented in time a little bit. So William Blake's dates are 1757 to 1827. And you may know William Blake's artwork, and you may know him as a poet. You may know his songs of innocence. Maybe you memorized Tiger, Tiger, Burning Bright as a child. You may know Jerusalem, his poem Jerusalem, or you may know his artwork. A lot of people who know Blake's artwork think this is a picture of God. It does look kind of godlike, doesn't it? But it's not God. It's Urizen, and Urizen is a character that appears in a book, that epic poem that Blake wrote called the Book of Urizen. And Urizen is not God. The poem is somewhat of a parody of Genesis. And in this parody, the creation of the universe is seen as a fall from the spiritual world into the material world. And the evil genius who participates this fall from the spiritual universe is this creation, Urizen. Here's another one of Blake's paintings. This is a small watercolor, and I think it's 12 by 16. And if you know Blake by his artwork, maybe, or maybe you know him by his poetry, maybe you don't know that when he was 4 years old, he woke up from his bed screaming. And what he had seen was the face of God, and it was pressed against his window. So, of course, he ran to his parents, and his parents, 3-year-old, 4-year-old child, they see things, they have night terrors, they didn't think anything of it. The difference was that Blake's visions persisted. And they weren't sleeping visions, they were actually waking visions. And the next one that he remembered, or he told about, happened when he was about 7 years old. And what happened is this, according to Blake. He was playing outside his London home and ran up a hill and looked up at a tree, and it was filled with angels, and their wings were sparkling like stars. I mean, he couldn't believe it. There it was right in front of him. So, of course, he ran home and he told his parents of this great thing. And his mother saved him from being beaten by his father. His father was not going to have a little boy who was a liar. So, Blake early on understood that his visions and revelations might cause people to doubt him, to think he was a liar, or to think he was crazy. But none of that stopped the visions. They were impervious to any threats or derision, and they continued throughout his life. So this picture, it's little. It's 16 by 12 inches. It's a watercolor. It's at the Victorian Albert Museum in London. And here's what's remarkable about it. Here, through somebody's eyes, who saw an angel, thought he saw an angel, or did see an angel, and we see what he saw all these years later, more than 200 years later, we can see the angel he saw. And I mean, for those of us who love art, that is the power of pictures, right? Because it's the only way you can really see through somebody else's eyes. Okay, you're saying film, the camera as a lens and it has its opinion, right? Photographs, but artwork, pictures are seen through somebody's eyes, and I think it's kind of a miracle. So this is Blake's vision. His visions were, people who have visions of angels, they always say the same thing, they're always euphoric. But a lot of people who have these mystical visions also have this kind of a vision, an apocalyptic vision. These are also by William Blake, and this is for Revelations, biblical illustrations. There are also small watercolors. I think I heard that the one on the left is right now in the National Gallery, and I think the other one is maybe in the Brooklyn Museum, the one on the right. But look at these. I mean, they're just amazing. Of all the devils that we see, they all look kind of the same. Even the magnificent ones that we see in film, they all look like insects, I think, or a lot the same. But Blake's, because it came from visions that he saw, things that he saw, they're very different. So on the left, we have the red dragon, and then we have the woman clothed in the sun. And you can see on the one, there's that dragon hovering over her, and its wings are making her hair go back like that. And the sea is coming up. And we know, if you've read Revelations, that she represents goodness. He is, of course, evil, and that she does triumph. But these are fabulous images, and they're not just something made up in a genre like, I'm going to do fantasy art. It wasn't like that. And I think for a lot of the artists who work in that genre today, it's not like that. And you don't have to have visions, but it's something that is deeply held. Of course, not everyone can put what they see on paper. Blake was a well-trained artist who went to the Royal Academy, and you can tell, look at the muscles in the leg on this side here, on the right side, or the way that foot is foreshortened. He was a wonderful artist. Today, Blake is considered one of Britain's very finest artists ever. But in his time, he was largely ignored. Did some people think he was crazy? Yes. It was reported that a friend who was at his bedside testified that as he died, he was singing of the beautiful things he saw in heaven. So today, maybe we put our visionaries, we name what's wrong with them and give them something to stop the visions. In those days, they did not. So like I said, his work was largely ignored, and this man was Britain's most popular artist. The picture you're looking at now is called Belsazar's Feast. And it was so popular that when it was exhibited at the Royal Academy in 1821, that they had to put a fence around it to protect it from the crowds. And John Martin, he was a scientist as well as an artist. And he had this idea that man is really at the mercy of a quite unfriendly universe. And so in all his pictures, you can see like tiny, terrified creatures at the mercy of greater powers. Belsazar's Feast, for those of you who don't know or don't remember the book of Daniel, this is when Belshazzar holds a great feast. He's the king of Babylon, and he brings out these gold and silver cups that his father Nebuchadnezzar has looted from the temple. And he says, hey, eat and drink out of this. Let's worship silver and gold. And of course, you don't do that without consequences. So the hand of God comes and writes a message on the wall. And there's the message. just a little close up of the message, so you can be terrified along with the people in the picture. And even if you don't know the story, you know the phrase, the handwriting on the wall. You saw the handwriting on the wall, that is where that comes from. And also what it said, what the message said is your days are numbered and your kingdom will fall and you with it. And that's where we get the phrase, your days are numbered. You can see Daniel right in the middle there with his hand up. He's holding his hand up in the middle, and all the way over in the left are the terrified king and queen. So Martin was accused of sensationalism. He was accused of pandering to public opinion, but his vision was not motivated by a desire to move the public. It was motivated by something else. This is Rembrandt's picture of the Belsazar's feast. And I think it's more true to the biblical account. They didn't say the letters were huge or the temple was a mile long, but you can see that Rembrandt did his painting 100 years earlier. And you can see that it is more a homocentric view of what happened. So we're going to go back to John Martin. John Martin's view was the way he thought of the universe was a combination of the thoughts of these two men that you're seeing on the screen now. The one is on the left, that is, you're looking at astronomer William Herschel. And William Herschel lived around the same time as Blake, 1738 to 1822. And Blake knew about him. He wrote about him in a poem. And Herschel built a telescope and in his backyard and looked at the night sky and began to form some conclusions. He decided, because he was looking at nebulae and the changes, and he came to the conclusion that the universe was not permanent, that it changed. And the change that he saw was that it was going to ultimately collapse into nothing, into catastrophe. This was not at all in any kind of accordance with the teaching of the church, which William Wordsworth on the right represented maybe more. Wordsworth once said he was willing to die for the Church of England. So he was a very devout person. And he thought that the stars were mansions created by nature's hand, and that was where the good would receive their just reward. So very different than the apocalyptic vision of William Herschel. John Martin's work, he combined these two things. He believed in God, he believed in the teachings of church, but he also believed in William Herschel and his kind of theory that the universe not only had a beginning, but also a decisive end. The reason people believed Herschel is he had some great results. He discovered the planet Uranus, it was the first new planet discovered in 2,000 years. So he had some scientific cachet. It was interesting. He had one good telescope, it worked great, and he tried another. He built a 40-foot telescope, but didn't work any better than the little one, plus the lens weighed 1,000 pounds, but I digress. Let's go back to John Martin. So this is perhaps his biggest success as a painter, and this is the Deluge. And he thought that, well, I'll just say it won a gold medal in the 1832 Paris Salon. It was the height of his career. And he thought that he shared a theory with the paleontologist that the deluge was the result of the sun, the moon, and a comet colliding. And that's what actually caused the deluge. So not everybody liked his work. And you can imagine why. John Ruskin, who is England's leading critic, called it a reckless accumulation of false magnitude. Painter John Constable, who did those beautiful green landscapes, hated it. And you can imagine why too. You know, you imagine the show and all the beautiful landscapes, and then this, you know, this is going to grab the attention from everyone, certainly. So, although he did have support from Turners, liked his work, Charles Dickens liked his work, but most of John Martin's support came from the scientists of the day, like Michael Faraday, who was famous for his experiments with electromagnetism, or geologist William Buckland, but most especially George Cuvier, the paleontologist, who shared that theory that the Great Flood was caused by this alignment of the sun, the moon, and the comet. So
Alice, we have a question from the audience regarding this work. And the question is, how did his technique change over the years, or his style? Did it change?
No, it really did not. And you're about to see, it's a good question. You're about to see his last paintings and find out why they were his last also. No, he maintained this style. Even when he was sketching, he maintained this style. It was deeply felt. It wasn't something he did to grab attention. This was something that was in his soul. So here's the story about John Martin and Cuvier, and you can believe it or not, but here it is. Here was what was written down. So one day, Georges Cuvier he hears about this painting, and so he journeys from France to see it because he wants to check out the geologic details and make sure that they're right scientifically. So he arrives at Martin's house. He couldn't call up on a cell phone, could he? He arrives there and Martin is not home, but somebody lets him in, and there it is. And these paintings are huge, as you're about to see, like 5 by 8 feet. And there it is on the easel. And Cuvier stands there regarding it. And then, after regarding it in silence, he takes the flower, the boutonniere, from his buttonhole, and he places it on Martin's palette along with his calling card. So we know that it has been proved by the great scientist. That's the story. I like to believe it. So this is one of a triptych of Martin's last paintings. The Deluge was his last success. And let me tell you what happened. His brother Jonathan, John and Jonathan, sounds the same, doesn't it? In 1829, his brother Jonathan set fire to the York Minster Cathedral. And people commented that the fire looked like one of John Martin's paintings. And that kind of made him fall from grace. Not only that, he paid for his brother's legal defense. They were going to hang Jonathan Martin. And John paid for the legal defense, which was successful because he went to the Bethlem Royal Psychiatric Hospital instead of the gallows. So this is the last series of paintings. He did this triptych before he died, and he did not live to see it exhibited. And they're all about the apocalyptic sublime. This first painting is called The Last Judgment, and you can see man being judged by the angels. And the next one I'm going to show you, I think it is the most terrifying picture in the history of art. And it's the reason why many people call John Martin the father of modern cinema. So you might know this painting. Whoa! That is the great day of his wrath. And I don't know how you think of that in 1851, because it looks like our present day special effects movies, only more frightening to me anyway. But what you have to understand about this painting is that this man believed this. And this is the third one when it's over, thank goodness. And this is the Plains of Heaven. After his death, his heirs took these paintings on a world tour. I've heard all kinds of estimates about who saw them. I saw a video with the curator from the Tate saying that 1 in 3 people on the planet saw them. I don't know. A lot of people saw them, and extremely popular images. I put this picture in to show you how big they are. That's them at the Tate, the three paintings, and now you see they put up this hall, and you can see the projectors on top. Now they do something where they animate on top of them, and they have sound and light and this whole spectacle. This is just personal, and you're certainly welcome to disagree. I just think it's a travesty, because what you were looking at is through John Martin's eyes, almost 200 years back in time. What he saw and he believed. And when you overlay that with sound and light, I think it destroys the power of pictures. Anyway, that's my opinion. So while John Martin was contemplating the Last Judgment and these huge apocalyptic scenes, ordinary people were looking at smaller marvels. And here they are. Under the improved accuracy of new lenses, you could see like a little piece of algae from a puddle in the backyard would shine like a jewel. And people could buy microscopes because at that time, because the price had gone down, they were about £5, so you could get a microscope in your home. And you could go in your puddle and you could get, there's lots in England, and you could collect these little beautiful bits of algae from a drop of water. And okay, this is the Victorian era, and Victorians loved ornament. So there was kind of a hobby. Some people actually did it professionally, making these kaleidoscopic patterns. I think they're just absolutely beautiful, and they're all made out of these little one-celled creatures. There's 2 slides of them. Pretty amazing, aren't they? Well, this kind of changed people's point of view, because all of a sudden there was this parallel universe, these beautiful things that were there, that existed in nature, but they were too small to be seen by the naked eye. And that, of course, you can imagine, was a real revelation. This revelation revived the theory of natural theology. And what you're seeing on the left is the main proponent of natural theology in that time. And this is a clergyman, and his name is William Paley, 1743 to 1805. So contemporary with Martin, and contemporary with Blake, and contemporary, a little ahead of the microscope craze. But he famously compared the intricacies of nature to the intricacies of a watch. And on the right-hand side, you can see a watch of that time, pretty intricate. And he said, you don't look at this watch and think it just happened, right? There's somebody made it. It's obvious. And as people really began to look into the intricacies of nature, it kind of renewed their faith. So here's what he said as kind of irrefutable proof that there was an intelligent designer. The hinges in the wings of an earwig and the joints of its antennae are as highly wrought as if the creator had nothing else to finish. And then he went on to say, so if he pays attention so much to the ear with. Imagine what attention God lavishes on men, his ultimate creation. So that kind of bolstered that theory that when they began seeing this alternate world.
So there's somebody online who actually is making the connection between these smaller than life designs and mandalas. Is that something that you would connect from a design or art historical perspective?
I hadn't thought of that, but yes, you know, I mean, I'm sure there probably is a connection. That's a good thought. And, you know, every time I give a talk or hear a talk, I just hope that I'll learn something, and that the people that are listening will not only learn something, but add something. So on the left it's just a little pamphlet for home use, common objects of the microscope. And on the right is a picture of theologian Charles Kingsley. And he was an amateur scientist. He had a microscope at home, and he started looking at things, and he began to see some evidence of Paley's divine providence in these very small creatures. He told a lecture audience in 1846, in the tiniest piece of mold on a decayed fruit, the tiniest animalcule from the stagnant pool, will imagination find inexhaustible wonders, and, he said, and here's the key, and a fanciful fairyland. And what happened is the entire pantheon of cherubs and fairies and nymphs and satyrs that had been vaguely human-sized began to shrink. So 17 years later, Kingsley, still fascinated with this, kind of gave up the ministry and became a writer. And one of his novels was The Water Babies. And The Water Babies is a fairy tale. It's also a treatise against child labor, and it's also a parable, kind of a reverse parable about Charles Darwin's newly published Origin of the Species, which Kingsley agreed with. And these are some illustrations from The Water Babies. This is by Jessie Wilcox Smith. And the story, very simply, Tom, who is a dirty chimney sweep, drowns and is kind of given back life. He evolves, he devolves into an ocean creature and is purified through a series of events by the water. Jessie Wilcox Smith, did she believe this? I think she did in a sense. She was a follower of a Swedish mystic and theologian and scientist who had his own visions, and we will be talking about him in a bit, but I believe that she did believe it, and that helped her make these beautiful illustrations. So this, you're seeing Richard Dickie Doyle on the right side, and his dates are 1824 to 1883. And he was one of the first to shrink the pantheon of, if you think of the Brothers Grimm's and those fairy tales, most of those people are kind of life-size, but Richard Dickie Doyle shrunk them all down. You can see them all cavorting around on this cover of Punch magazine. And he did this cover of Punch. Look at my notes and see if I have when he first did it. Of course I don't. But after he made the first cover, they used the same cover for 100 years. And that was longer than Dickie Doyle stayed at Punch. He quit after maybe 7 years because he felt the magazine was anti-Catholic. But after he quit, he became a freelance illustrator and Britain's leading illustrator of the fairy kingdom. This is from his masterpiece book called In Fairyland, where he made a series of paintings of the elf world. And it was a whole world. It was this unseen world that might exist with, it was like the human world. There were good people and not so good people. It wasn't particularly evil, but it was kind of a full universe of people, an elfin biosphere, you could say. I always have sympathy. I always like Richard Doyle because he never met his deadlines, and he, even though he was a gifted illustrator, he was hampered by the fact that he could never get organized. And you think of people in the back in time of just working because they didn't have the distractions we had. But Richard was entirely human, and I always like him for that. In his elfin biosphere, as I said, there was everything. There was even the sensual. Look at this one for fairyland. My goodness, look at all those draped, semi-nude figures on that tree, and imagine them in Victorian times when you didn't show your ankles in public, and even pianos wore skirts to hide their legs. Look at these things. Reviewers loved the book, but they noted they were just as popular with adults as with children. And one of Doyle's contemporaries noted, I love this, he said, they're more appreciated by the used up and the disillusioned than the young. So I like that. Anyway, that is Richard Doyle, the premier illustrator of fairyland. So some of you are wondering and are way ahead of me, but yes, Alice Carter, what about all those paintings in the salon with those life-size pictures of that didn't shrink, did it? Look at these giant pictures by Bouguereau on the left and Cabanel on the right. They're the same subject, nymphs and satyrs, and you can look at that. Let's go back. We're still in the Victorian era. We're in 1873 for Bouguereau, and even earlier in 1860 for Cabanel. And think of these people who were, I mean, it was like going to some pornographic exhibition for them. And you can see why thousands of people showed up at the salons. But why didn't they shrink? Because of the microscope, and a very good reason, because these paintings were hung cheek by jowl, floor to ceiling, and couldn't see tiny little fairy creatures. So most fine artists continued to paint large, except here's a piece by Turner. And I know that you're thinking, this is by Turner? Oh, of course it is, but where's the boat in the ocean? Well, this is Queen Mab's Cave, inspired by Queen Mab character in Shakespeare. And if you remember, Queen Mab would ride her chariot over, I think it was Titania while she was sleeping, and bring her dreams. So Queen Mab was the midwife of the fairies, and you can see this somewhat sensual and atypical picture by Turner of this miniaturized world that was coming into popularity at the time. So another view, this is also Queen Mab. This is called Fairy Feller's Masterstroke. And yes, you fans of Freddie Mercury, it was a song by Queen, but this is the painting that inspired it. And it is hard to see. You really need to, if you're in England and you haven't seen it, I believe it's at the Tate. It's only 21 by 15 inches. And what is happening in this picture is I don't know if you can see the guy in the center with the axe, but we'll put him hopefully up a little closer in a minute. But he is going to cleave an acorn there. And in that acorn, when he cleaves it, he is going to release the secret cells of the dark abyss. Another thing interesting about this picture, the artist Richard Dadd, 1817 to 1866, he painted this picture over a period of 9 years, from 1855 to 1864. So we're right in the middle of that age of the microscope, the popularization of it. But the interesting thing was that this picture was painted in the Bethlehem Psychiatric Hospital, and the painter, the artist Richard Dadd, was in there for the murder of his father. His murdered father appears in this picture. If you look all the way up in the right-hand corner, you can see a little man with a mortar and pestle. He's the top person up there, and that's his murdered father. And below the king and queen, right in the middle of the composition, that's Oberon and Titania. Take a look at this, artists. Pretty amazing, right? It's pretty amazing. I have some more details. So you can see the top of the axe there, right at the bottom middle. And then there's the whole figure, and he's about to release the secret cells of the dark abyss. So we're gonna release them with him, and we're gonna talk about him in just a minute here. We go down here. There's the very bottom. I just love the way that dark goes against the light there. Look at that. All those years in the psychiatric hospital, he was doing that. If you can go to there's a website that has all the artwork that was done in that hospital that was saved. They don't explain it, but you can look at it. Maybe there is no explanation. Well, the secret cells of the dark abyss were actually unleashed in the 1860s by French chemist Louis Pasteur. And he discovered, as you know, that living organisms cause illness. And this was, I mean, people did not believe it. And the reason they didn't believe it is they didn't believe that these beautiful little things that they were seeing in the puddles were powerful enough to bring down God's ultimate creation, man. They didn't believe it. And it was only when Pasteur made vaccines that worked for anthrax and rabies that it proved the point. Here's a weird thing. It was 1886, there were 4 children who were vaccinated and who survived rabies. And they were exhibited in a shop window in New York, and 300,000 people came to see them. That's what kind of miracle it was. You would think that this would generate a lot of hope, but actually, and we know this in our times, right? That sometimes new things generate more fear than hope. These are paintings by the American artist Abbott Thayer, 1849 and 1920 to 1921. So let's go back to the fear a little bit. Public health officials, they were so alarmed by this germ theory that they warned of aggressive little germs, and this is from the health department in New York, pressing out of broken drains, slipping under doors, and flying through the open sash, resting in the dust on the lintel, and again, pouncing down on the babe in the cradle. People were scared, and we understand that. And Abbott Thayer, who was a grand manner portrait painter, took all this to heart, and he decamped to New England with his family to the countryside and began producing these breathtaking pictures of these ethereal angels. At night, the family slept in unheated 3-sided lean-tos, and breathed what they felt was more pure air so that they wouldn't get sick. So across the Atlantic, these insidious germs also worked their way into fairyland. And it wasn't always such a nice place. These are, of course, by Arthur Rackham, the amazing English illustrator. And now we're going through the century. We're 1867 to 1939. And he was, during his time, he had supplanted Dickie Doyle as the best-known illustrator of fairyland, even though he had a score of imitators. And what set his work apart was this idea of combining the grotesque with the gorgeous, that element of danger and evil that could be. It wasn't all like Dickie Doyle, a little sensuous, a little larceny. There's something dark about Rackham's world, and it mimicked the new understanding of the microscopic world. Rackham, if you know about him, he was outwardly very conservative and cautious, always worked in a bow tie, but he lived some kind of double life, kind of suspended between his own ordered reality and this alternate universe that he created in 3,000 illustrations. American painter George Innes, we're going to see his work in a bit, thought that Rackham's work was more than fancy. He said, this is a quote from him, "Rackham has really seen with his mind's eye these delightfully fantastic creatures." And maybe he did. So there are people who saw them with more than their mind's eye. Believing with your mind's eye and actually believing are different things. What you're looking at now is two young girls in Cottingley, England, who took pictures with their father's camera in 1917 and said the pictures revealed fairies. Well, come on, look at this. Who is going to believe this? Well, Arthur Rackham didn't. He thought they looked like his drawings. They weren't. They were actually the works of one of his imitators, Claude Arthur Shepherdson. But the girls waited 60 years before they would admit that these were fake cardboard cutouts. But they, even after 60 years, they said the fairies were real. Who believed it? Come on. Well, here's Shepherdson's drawing. Not so, they're children. So who believed it? Well, Arthur Conan Doyle, the inventor of Sherlock Holmes, for one, believed it. This is what he said. "These little folk who appear to be our neighbors with only some small difference of vibration to separate us will become familiar. The recognition of their existence will jolt the material 20th century mind out of the heavy ruts in the mud and will make it admit that there is glamour and mystery to life." And a lot of people were afraid of science, that it would take the mystery out of life. But of course it didn't. It was like Newton's third law: for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. So for every rational explanation of nature during this age of discovery, there was some kind of any astonishing empirical revelation. There was an equally incredible supernatural revelation. I guess it's just like that. So what you're looking at are two paintings here, and they are by an American artist, the painter Samuel Morse, 1791 to 1870. Don't know the last digit, but the 1870s. And of course, we don't remember what a wonderful painter Samuel Morse was, because his accomplishments in art are now overshadowed by his accomplishments in science. The painting on the left is James Monroe, the our fifth president. And it was done in 1819, and it's in the collection of the White House. And the one on the right is his self-portrait done quite a few years earlier in 1812, and that is in the National Portrait Gallery. So let's go to the, well, we can go to the next one. So I'm going back. The telegraph revolutionized communications and really inspired an interest in a revival of interest in psychic transmissions. Mesmerism found new devotees, and mesmerism is when you have visions under hypnosis. I believe that's mostly the way it's described. And then spiritualism. And spiritualism is when you have visions like Blake did, fully conscious. And like the Swedish scientist that I told you, Blake and Jesse Wilcox Smith followed his views, Emanuel Swedenborg, and that is him on the left. And he was a scientist. He was interested in anything that showed, unlocked the secrets of the universe. So as a scientist, he drew up plans for a flying machine. He studied anatomy. He studied the heart. He studied the blood, and he began to think that maybe within the blood there was some kind of a spiritual core that carried the spirit, the soul, through the body into the bloodstream. So it was like he said it was the origin of life was a sustaining energy that ran through the bloodstream, and that the source of that energy was God. So very respected scientist and very much into his times. But he started in about the age of 55, he started having kind of intense dreams and visions. And these always in a dream though. And when a few years later, I think it was maybe 2 years after they started, he began to experience wakeful dreams. They weren't dreams, they just happened when he was awake. And he felt that he had actually been to heaven and hell, that he could travel through heaven and hell and come back. And sounds crazy, doesn't it? It sounds like, oh, okay. But there were these events that kind of proved it. There was one time when he was at a dinner party, and this was for the 1st of July in 1759. It was recorded, and suddenly he's at this big party, becomes agitated. The party is in Göteborg, and he feels that there's a fire 250 miles away in Stockholm where he lives. And he feels that it's almost at his house. And then 2 hours later, he calms down, says, no, it stopped before it got to his house. And people are thinking, okay. But it turns out to be true. Yeah, it actually happened. So then the next incident is less dramatic and less easily documented, and it happened a year later. And the widow of I think it was the French ambassador to Sweden, her husband died, and she was being charged for silver service that she said that he already paid for, and she couldn't find the receipt, and Swedenborg told her where the receipt was, and she found it. Well, okay, it's just the two of them. Then there was the incident where he was presented at the court of Sweden, and the Queen Louisa, she wanted to communicate with her dead brother. So she asked Swedenborg to send him a message and bring her the answer, which he did. And when he came back, she was amazed because it was an answer that only she knew. So, okay, then the last one, the very last one, it was at the end of his life, and his health was failing, and somebody wrote him a letter and said, I want to see you next month on a certain date. And he said, no, I'm gonna die. And he gave the exact date of his death. He said he wouldn't be able to be there because in 6 months, on the 29th of January 1771, he would be, 1772, I guess it would be, he would be dead. And he, in fact, really did die on that day. So anyway, he always said that he had no desire to be revered as a prophet. He was just trying to understand the universe. He didn't want to be the founder of a religious movement. When he talks about the new church, he's not talking about a church with him. He's just talking about a shift in the way that humanity sees religion, that you understand that the spiritual world and the material world are connected, and that connection is God in his way of thinking. Of course, people followed him. Why not? Of course they did. On the right, you see a painting by Innes. I said we were going to come back to him, and we are. And this is called The Valley of the Shadow. And what it shows is the transition from the desolate natural realm, the spiritual journey from the desolate natural realm, which you see the lit up man in the foreground and the desolate plains, and then to the beautiful spiritual world. And that is what you see represented in the blue area with the cross. So as we said, everyone who sees angels seems to have a very euphoric experience with it. This beautiful, beautiful painting is by Eugene Therion, 1839 to 1910. It's Joan of Arc, and she's being visited by the archangel Michael. And it used to be at Notre Dame. I don't know where it is now because of the fire. So Swedenborg's revelations, why did they resonate with people? And I think that they address head-on the conundrum posed by Charles Darwin's Origin of the Species. And that question, Benjamin Disraeli famously told an audience in 1864, is man an ape or an angel? And I think for someone contemplating the two alternatives, the writings of Emanuel Swedenborg offered solace. There was an eminent scientist whose personal experience verified humanity's primacy in God's firmament. He had been there, he had seen that. And his admirers included poet, besides Innes and Blake, and Jesse Wilcox Smith, included William Butler Yeats, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and this man, American illustrator Howard Pyle, which is bringing us to the 20th century. Howard Pyle completed more than 2,500 commissioned illustrations during his 35-year career, and his best works, I think, bridged imagination and reality, and those are the works that he wrote and illustrated himself, including the Merry Adventures of Robin Hood, Otto and the Silver Hand, The Garden Behind the Moon, and 4 volumes of the Arthurian legends that were published between 1903 and 1910. So Howard Pyle is shown here with some of his students. You may recognize N.C. Wyeth in the background, the 4th from the left. But there's George Harding and Gordon McCouch and Thornton Oakley and N.C. Wyeth and Alan True. I believe that's who they are. Howard Pyle embraced the Swedenborgian religion, follower of Emanuel Swedenborg, and His faith was tested in 1899. He went to Jamaica. He was going to make a tour of the West Indies because he wanted to get some reference for a series about pirates and buccaneers that he was going to do for Harper's Magazine. And while he was gone, his youngest son, Sellers, died suddenly. Of course, he was just absolutely devastated. The death certificate says croup. I don't know exactly what happened, but he was completely devastated. But the idea of a very real heaven and hell, a place that could be visited by someone like Emanuel Swedenborg, gave him comfort throughout his life. And he said in a letter once, he said, "Death is so thin a crust of circumstances that I can feel his heart beat just on the other side." But he said that about his son. He tried what part of what he was trying to do with his students is he wanted to establish an American school of art. American art was considered lesser than European art. It was a kind of upstart country, and he wanted something unique in American. And he felt that this combination of the spiritual and the real was what would become the real American art. And he was right, wasn't he, with the superheroes and all that has been invented or has been really started in this country. Illustrator Frank Spoonover, who was kind of a biographer of Pyle and wrote a lot of things that he said down. Spoonover was his student. So there was an actual living in his creation. And Pyle would tell his students to jump into put their heart into a picture and jump in after it. And that's what he was trying to get, and the spiritual quality that had come down from the 1700s all the way to the 20th century. And here are some of his beautiful pictures. They are in the show, I believe, at the Rockwell right now. And this is the Travels of the Soul. And I don't know, it depends if you can see them, how big your screen is. But here comes the soul on the left, and she's coming through the wicket of paradise into the mortal world. And you can see the red hooded figure waiting for her, biding its time. That's death. And then in the second, the soul goes through the meadows of youth where there's music and love and everything is okay. And then in the third, the soul goes into the valley of the shadows where she is handed the bitter cup. And that is the trials and tribulations that we all go through. And then in the last one, at the gates of life, where the soul is escorted back to paradise, and you can see death there blocking the way, like Cerberus, he, the soul, cannot go back. So here's just a little story to end with. And this story is from Pyle's student, Frank Spoonover. Pyle his school was in the Brandywine Valley, and he often took his students out to paint outdoors. Of course, what better way to learn about color than to paint outdoors? And here they are with the models standing there. So this is according to Spoonover. So one day, one beautiful October afternoon, Pyle puts away his brushes and tells the model, "No, it's okay, go away, it's over," and calls out to his students, "Come on," and he wants to follow him along a small stream. So they all troop after him, and emerging from the shadows, they look up and they see an oak tree just shimmering in the last light of the day. And Pyle says, "Look, just look at it. It's a wonderful creation of a worker in metal, a great yellow thing with plate after plate of burnished gold, towering up above the arch of heaven, all clothed in shimmering garments, standing there to reflect the glory of the divine maker. I don't know if he saw angels, but I hope so. Thanks very much for listening, everybody. That's it.
Alice, thank you so much. What an amazing talk. I think one of our viewers said it best, Antonia, which is, thank you so much for pulling together these incredible connections between visionary artists, cutting edge science of its time, and of course, the unseen world. How did you even begin to make these connections? We're so honored to have published your essay, and I just want to remind everybody, it is in our catalog for the Enchanted exhibition. Love to hear how you kind of pulled this together.
Well,
it's just unbelievable.
You know, I guess you have to thank the Norman Rockwell Museum for that, because if you hadn't told me to write an essay, I wouldn't have pulled all those things together. But, I don't know how many, I assume that people are listening love fantasy art. And it's always regarded as right under knitting in the hierarchy of genres, like, swords and dragons, and fantasy art, it comes from a very deep and real place. It is tied up with our religion, with our beliefs, with how we try to make sense of a world which often seems like it has no sense. The idea that you said, Stephanie, how can the world that is beautiful, how can there be evil in a beautiful world? How does a caring deity, why is there evil? Why all these huge questions? What is the soul? What happens to us after we die? These are real questions, and these are questions that artists with a lot of courage and not afraid of sentiment. I mean, it's easy to make an abstract painting. Who's going to say, "Oh, that blot on the wall does not that disagrees with my sense of the soul"? Nobody. It's a beautiful decoration. It's a wonderful design, but it's not the courage of the artists who go out on a limb to paint what they've seen in a vision or a dream or in reality. Takes a lot of courage to put yourself out there. And, I greatly admire the artists who do that, and our fantasy artists are among that group who are brave like that. And I love to see through the eyes of somebody else a picture. And when people talk about Norman Rockwell, they say, "Well, the world wasn't really like that." Well, the world maybe wasn't like John Martin saw it, but that's how he saw it. That's how Blake saw it, and we see it through somebody else's eyes, and that's the beauty of it. Anyway, long answer, short question.
Thank you so much. I think that notion of seeing through someone else's eyes is so important, and it opens up worlds. So thank you for this wonderful evening. Your work is just exceptional. We thank everybody for joining us. It was really a pleasure to have you. And we hope you will join us tomorrow morning, starting at 10 o'clock, for a little bit more about Norman Rockwell, and then 2 fantastic panels with 6 incredible fantasy illustrators who are featured in our current exhibition. So thank you again, Alice, and thank you everybody for joining us.